All right. Welcome, everybody. Great turnout today. Some new faces, some familiar faces, people I know from elsewhere in the world. This is wonderful. So, as always, I want to start with thanks to Alec Julian, who is acting as engineer producer, Patricia Julian, composer of our great music, and also to everybody who has sent us a donation to help cover the production costs of this Zoom talk, now in its 6th episode out of 8. And for the first time, I also want to do a tribute. So this particular talk, I'm doing 2 tributes, actually. So the first one is to Piers Kelly. So Piers is an Australian researcher who is pretty much the only person in the world who is actually going out into the field and researching invented scripts and how and why this happened and what has happened to them since. So this one's on you, Piers. And then also, this show is a tribute to everybody who has ever invented or tried to invent a script. And we're not talking about conscripts for a novel or for a TV series or something. We're talking about somebody who is trying to give, so to speak, a visual voice to their people, their language culture. So the Endangered Alphabets Project is really about 2 kinds of writing system. One is what you'd expect, which is writing systems that have been in use for centuries, sometimes millennia, which for various reasons have been elbowed aside or marginalized to the point where their user community is very small. But the other kind is invented scripts. And in some respects, these 2 categories are very different, and in some respects, they're very similar. And they're very similar for the reason that they both face the same kinds of opposition. So an invented script is sort of like a newborn animal or newborn bird. It's a tough world out there. There are many forces working against it, and it's thriving. And we're going to look at a lot of those today. So when I sat down to count how many scripts, how many writing systems we know have been specifically created by a person or a small group of people, and we know who that person was, it's over 100. It's at least 110. And of course, there are probably many more that we don't know about. And of those 110, all of them are in the Atlas of Endangered Alphabets. And it's a sign of how hard it is to create a script for your people and to make it work, that they're all in the Atlas of Endangered Alphabets. I can only think of a very small handful of scripts that were created and really became widely used. And those tended to be created by or at the behest of rulers of nations. So they have an advantage. Okay, so let's start out then with the question, why would somebody go to all of the trouble, both intellectual trouble and toil and opposition of creating a script for their people? And we have a very good clue to that coming up in this first slide. So this is Piers Kelly, great researcher going on here. So in the 1820s, he's talking about the Karen people. Now it's very interesting. In the area roughly between southern China and Myanmar, and say Bangladesh, India, there is an upland area which is home to a large number of peoples who are or have been at various times oppressed or refugees. And the Karen people, which is a sort of a very diverse group of people, living throughout this region. In the 1820s, they told a missionary exactly why. So this goes back to what we were talking about in the first episode, which is myths of language creation, or rather script creation. And in this particular case, they had a script ancestrally, they believe, but it had become lost. And they said, we have been an ignorant people, without a government or a king, a government or our own, subject to other kings and other governments, despised and kicked about, trodden underfoot by everybody like dogs. And that's such a passionate expression of their sense of having been abused, but having been abused specifically because they didn't have their own writing system. And the rest of this slide, which you can see in the recorded version, which will be available later, it talks about what their mythology was about the script that they had once had. So this, their sense of inadequacy and loss, therefore, is so deep, it's seeped into their narrative about themselves, especially as in their story about the fact that they had writing, they lost it, they sort of blame themselves and other people who were oppressing them. But it's a real sign of how low down they are. So next slide, please. So here on the left, I'm particularly interested, there's another group from this same area, the Chin people. So let's just have a look here at their writing loss myth. They had an ancestral mother who laid a clutch of eggs from which 101 brothers hatched. And the youngest was the Chin, who wandered far away, and by the time he returned, the world had already been carved up among his older brothers. Oops, we're having a little technical difficulty here. Oh, nice. Okay, we're back again. Okay. In compensation, his mother gave him the mountains, along with elephants, horses, and other livestock, and placed him under the tutelage of another of his brothers, who was Burmese. The brother pretended to instruct him in the art of writing, but instead showed him only the back of the writing slate, and then gave him, used a whole lot more tricks. And eventually the Chin had lost all of his livestock and didn't know how to read and write, and was left destitute, illiterate, and stateless in the mountains. So we're not going to look at the Hmong one right now, but you can look at it later. In the Hmong legend, they had writing. It was in a series of books. The Chinese attacked them, they fled, and their horses ate the books. So you have this sense of how deeply they recognized that the lack of a writing system affected them and their entire culture and their opportunities. So they responded, the Karen and the Chin and also the Hmong, in a really, really interesting way, and an interestingly similar way. And that is that all of those three cultures at various times in the last couple of hundred years that we know of, individual people created writing systems in the face of this extraordinarily deep sense of loss and inadequacy. So this was a revolutionary and radical act. And it also happened in the face of the fact that other writing systems were coming into that area in the early 19th century. So missionaries were starting to come in and introduce the Latin script. The Burmese script was available. And so you want to ask yourself the question, so why didn't they use those? And of course, the answer is that some of them did. But here we're getting to the absolute crux of the matter. So the missionaries are introducing the Latin script to try and make it work with the indigenous languages because it's the script they know. It's also the script they see in the Bible. So it has a kind of momentum that is sort of moving in to fill this void. But of course, you also have momentum behind the Burmese script, but that's the script of the enemy, of the conqueror in many cases. And so you wind up in a situation that happens over and over again with script creation, which is, it's not that there are not other scripts available, it's that they're not what you want. When I say you, I don't mean everybody. I mean somebody who creates a script is going to go, you know what? The Latin script, the problem with that is that it doesn't fit our language. The Latin script has 5 vowels. Many languages in the world have many more vowels. They have tonal qualities, all kinds of things. Besides which, it comes in this package with missionary Christianity, which some want, some don't want. Then you've got the script of the oppressor. So in, for example, Okinawa, the Okinawans, and then further north, the Ainu, I was doing a carving. I've actually done carvings for both of them, and I was left with this question: do I do these carvings in conventional Japanese characters? Because the Japanese were the oppressors, they were the invaders. So you've got a really interesting and complex problem going on. And in a way, it's a sign of the depth of despair and the determination to lead one's people out of this sense of shame that we saw in the first slide, that the enormous effort to create a writing system begins. Okay, next slide, please. So I believe in the audience today is John Duffy, who has done research into the Hmong, whom I mentioned are also from this area. And the Hmong have had as many as 9 different writing systems invented in different times in different places. And John does a great job of explaining, why this might be. And he says, each of these writing systems offered the Hmong a particular narrative, a competing story of the world and available identities, whether those of Miao rebels, Christian believers, citizens of the state, or mystics possessed of a secret and transcendent knowledge. In many cases, Hmong people embraced more than one of these identities, defining themselves through the sounds and symbols of multiple languages, literacies, and ideologies. Hmong people in the 20th century, for example, may have learned to write their own language in the characters of the Lao and Thai alphabets, in the Romanized letters of the RPA, in the mystical characters of the Pao Ho, or in all 4 of these. So everybody needs to feel they belong. And different writing systems offer different communities to belong to. So now let's look about how they actually went about, or individuals went about creating these scripts, because these are fascinating stories in themselves. And again, this is from research by Piers Kelly. So the Chin, their mythical loss of writing, I'm on the 4th line here, was resolved at the hands of a legendary prophet by the name of Pao Sin Hao. Apprenticed to a prophetess in about 1888, Pao Sin Hao was to suffer a long illness, and in 1900, he began having a series of visions that soon elevated him as a prophet in his own right. The visions foretold of new technologies such as railway trains and steamships, and of devastating wars between nations. Here we go. An Englishman appeared in the visions and held a mirror up to his face in order to force Pao Sin Hao to confront the calamities. By 1902, the Englishman returned to Pao Sin Hao to instruct him in the art of writing using stones in the shape of letters. When he had finally mastered the system, he woke from the dream and began copying down the letters in a frenzy. The deputy commissioner of the Chin Hills was impressed with his invention and encouraged him to publish it, but Powsenhow decided to keep revising the system until the final version was eventually completed in 1931. Okay, so it is really common to read text about these scripts that is a little dismissive or condescending about what are sometimes called revealed scripts. This idea that it came to you in a dream or a vision. But I want to look at that in a slightly different way. So in many of these cases, the person who had the dream was pre-literate, didn't know writing, didn't use writing. And so the notion of being authorized or even ordered to create a script involves this enormous intellectual leap. It's not as if someone came to us and said, oh, here's a bunch of different letters, because we understand the concept of letters and symbols and phonetics and all this kind of stuff. These are vast intellectual steps forward. And interestingly enough, what you saw was that in that particular dream, he dreams of an Englishman who is that, he's a representative of empire, as you saw. Other scripts were born in remarkably similar ways. Let's have a look at the next slide. Okay, so here we are, thousands of miles away in Africa. The Weisse Script, we're looking at the Weisse Script here that was created in the 1830s, Bukele, in what is now Liberia. If you look at the bottom of the paragraph, he had a dream in which a tall, venerable-looking white man in long coat appears saying, I am sent to you by other men, I bring you a book. And according to Bukele, the white man revealed a written script that on waking he couldn't remember. So this is also really interesting. It's amazing how many of these revealed scripts, and I can think of at least a dozen, where the person who has the vision can barely understand the power and importance of the vision, but recognizes that it is extraordinarily important. It's a mission, and turns to somebody else, or in some cases a group of friends, and tries to explain writing to them, and they write it down. So it's as if you have the visionary and you have the scribe. Now, the visionary is actually going to turn out to be really important, because the notion of introducing a new script, especially in a colonial setting, because both Vai and other West African scripts and these scripts from this area in Southeast Asia, they're facing opposition. And so the notion that this script is not just an idea, but it's an idea that is a divine idea, and it comes as a command, and it comes with the power of writing, that turns the dreamer script creator not just into a literate person, it turns that person into a messiah. It turns that person into somebody who has been given the opportunity of redeeming the ills and misfortunes and travails of his people by this writing system. Okay, next slide, please. Here's another example from Africa. And this is an example of how these revealed scripts, especially because they're being revealed to people who often are not already using writing and therefore have a sense of what letters should look like, these can become really extraordinary. So this is, in this case, the dreamer was a member of the Kimbanguist church who dreams of the prophet of that church. So again, it's not a god, it's not an Englishman, but it's that same kind of divine figure who is given who gives the command, create a writing system. And this one is really extraordinary because he wakes up and he looks at a brick wall and notices that the mortar around the bricks could be seen as a series of patterns that in particular feature these two sacred and geometrically opposed shapes, a 5 and a 2. And he uses these shapes to build a writing system called Mandombe or Mandombe, which has a word that has three meanings. Pour les noirs, for the blacks. Ce qui est confié aux noirs, that which is confided in the blacks, or à la manière des noirs. So it's an entrustment very specifically to Black Africans, in this case in the Congo. And so the script, if we look at the next slide, turns out looking like this. So each of these characters builds up in a syllabic way. And I absolutely love this script because there's no kind of convention about how tall any of these individual syllables should be. And so it makes printing really an interesting challenge, and Unicode is struggling with it badly. But it is a perfect example of somebody who is so driven to bring the miracle of writing that the notion of what writing ought to look like or what other writing looks like becomes irrelevant. So the need for writing has transcended the history of writing. Okay, moving on now, I'm sorry, I'm going back to my notes here. So what I'm going to do now is show you a series of slides, or Alec is going to show you a series of slides, and I am going to talk in the background. And these are slides of invented writing systems, and all of them have really extraordinary and remarkable qualities or histories of their own. Okay, so here we go. So this is another of the scripts from West Africa. This is Bassa, or Bassa-Va, which means Bassa signs. And so Bassa followed on from Vai and a series of other scripts in this area in West Africa. And it became associated with the people and also with their religion. It is modestly successful in that particular area. This actually was one of the first series of carvings that I did. And it was the first endangered alphabet carving I did where somebody who used the script had actually written it and sent it to me. This is Article 1, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in handwriting that I then copied out. Okay, next one. So this is Hanifi Rohingya. The Rohingya people, originally from Myanmar and that area, again, suffering extraordinary acts of repression, cultural genocide, and actual genocide. Shortly before all that happened, one of them decided, and this is less of a revealed script, this is, okay, so Rohingya has been written in the Latin alphabet, especially in a Christian community. It's been written in the Arabic alphabet, especially in a Muslim community. It's been written in the Burmese alphabet in a more kind of civic sense. And he was like, we want our own writing system. And so this is one of my carvings in Hanifi Rohingya, which is now being taught in the refugee camps in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. Because as I've said in a previous talk, sustaining your sanity and your sense of cultural identity is crucial when you are at such a low place. Okay, next. So this is sort of the opposite of a divinely inspired script, but it's another great example of the relationship between a community and its culture and its way of life and its writing system. So the Zagawa people, who number roughly 1 million, and they live on the border of Sudan and Chad. Obviously, it's a very desert area, also a very poor area. They had no writing system of their own. They were not Arabic, but it's an area that was dominated by the Arabic language and Arabic script. Again, they felt it didn't really suit either their cultural identity or their language needs, their phonemic needs. And so a vet created a series of symbols based on the branding marks that were branded on camels to show ownership. You know, we're used to seeing this in Western movies where, you know, the rancher brands the cows. Well, camels are branded as well to show ownership. And if you look at it, the letters really have that very kind of clear, uniform, one line kind of quality that would fit perfectly with a brand. So this is like one of the great indigenously appropriate scripts of the world. Next we have, right, so you're saying, wait a second, that isn't writing. First of all, that's a car. And secondly, it's a decorated car. So this is a form of art that is found especially in the Bantu areas in southern Africa, and it's called Ndebele, and it's an art form that is used to decorate houses in particular. And this is one of a series of expressions of that artistic tradition. There's a particular artist whose work became so well known that BMW asked her to do a concept car painted in this artwork. And I believe British Airways also had a 747 tail painted in this Ndebele style. And out of that artwork tradition and other artwork traditions, arose one of the most extraordinary, colorful and indigenous scripts in the world called Ditema Saadinoko. So, and we'll see that now, don't forget the BMW, that's what the script looks like. And the notion of both creating a script that adequately represents all the sounds of the languages, and don't forget, this is an area where you have phonemes that we do not have in the Latin alphabet at all. Every one of those shapes corresponds to a particular expression and how it is expressed in the mouth. So like Hangul, this is a diagram to pronunciation. But also, it obviously pays homage to its cultural background and history and identity. Just really spectacular stuff. I love this. Okay, next. So this, we've talked about this script before. This is actually a celebration of the success of one of the new scripts in west to west central Africa. This is Adlam. This was a script that was created by two boys whose father was had a sort of a sideline that when people received letters in their village, he was the one who would read them out loud to the person who'd received the letter, and was always complaining that the Arabic script, which was used in the region, did not adequately represent the sounds of their own language. And so these two boys just spent a year kind of doodling and coming up with a writing system that would work. And they faced a certain amount of opposition, and we'll get to that in a minute. But eventually it's become extraordinarily successful, as you can see here. It's become digitized. I'm hoping that Craig Cornelius is part of the audience today because he played an active role in liaising with them to have this digitized and available on Android. So here we have this great in sort of display of indigeneity in terms of hairstyling and dress and language and the whole shebang. Okay, so moving on. Yes, so one of the other interesting features that people who create scripts take into account, or could possibly take into account, is how easily can it be learned? And if you have a script that either contains so many characters or does not have enough visual distinctiveness in the characters, then that's going to be a challenge. But in this case, so this is Wan Cho, and this was created by Banwang Lo Su, who's a teacher, and he decided that he would create characters which actually looked like the initial sound of a word that everybody would recognize who saw them. And so these letter forms are based on visible local shapes such as human postures, birds, trees, tattoos, rivers, fruits, and insects. There's a hornbill in there somewhere. The kind of, we've seen something about the intellectual conception and challenge of that. We've also seen something about the relationship between the culture and its history and the need. I want to say one last thing about all of this, which is that every one of these scripts that we've seen so far, and every other invented script I know about, was created by a man, with one exception. And this is a woman who has created more scripts than anybody else. Typically people, it's a life's work for somebody to create one script. This is a woman who's created 20, I think, at this point. So her name is Professor Prasanna Shri. She teaches at Andhra University in Andhra Pradesh in eastern India. And she has made it her business to go into the hill areas and the mountainous areas and the remote areas where there are indigenous groups who are frankly looked down upon and even despised and spoken of dismissively because they don't have their own writing system. And she's made it her life's work to create writing systems for these people. Now, the general literacy rate is pretty low in some of these areas. Whether these writing systems have improved that literacy rate, I don't know. But certainly they can't have hurt. And I need to explain something about her method. So if you look at these letters, you kind of go, they're all wearing a hat. They all have that kind of inverted V. And there's a reason for that, because what she does is she spends a period of time with these cultures and looks for some visual icon, some element that they will feel identifies them as a people. And so each of her scripts has the interesting quality of they all look different, but they all look similar in that they have this kind of repeated basic shape with variations. So if you look at the top left, what you'll see, there's the inverted V, and then there's the wiggly line, and then different things sort of branching out from it. So here's the explanation. If we move on to the next slide. This is for the Kupiya language of the Kupiya people. The Kabir script has its roots in Indian mythology. Ratnakara was a thief and a bird hunter. At one point, he shoots an arrow at 2 pigeons. One of the birds falls dead. The sight of the surviving pigeon in tears over its dead partner made the thief regret his crime. He's so consumed by remorse. Hang on a second, I can't actually read what's on the screen here because there's the faces are in the way. He did not notice a vast anthill called Valmikam grow up around him. So God appeared and instructed him to write the great Indian epic Ramayana. So the holy sage was named as Agni Sharma, and after his emergence in the anthill, he was known as Valmiki. The language his descendants spoke was the Kupiya language of the Valmiki tribe. And so their script is designed around the form of a bow and arrow. So what you saw there was not a V, that was the bow, and the curved line coming down from it was the arrow. Thank you, Alec, for going back so people can see what the heck it is I am talking about. Now we get to the question, so how do you make it work as a social event and a social asset? So we've talked a lot about creating scripts. We've seen scripts where it became a social asset because the person who created the script became a messiah, a prophet, a leader of his people, which often didn't end well because the colonial forces or the opposition then had a habit of going in there and killing him. So I decided I would ask Mowgli Lookout, who is of the Osage Nation, and he is responsible for creating the Osage script, which is now in use. It's being taught. It's part of the Osage language revival and the Osage visual identity. So I asked him several questions, and if you'll excuse me, I'm actually going to refer to my notes here. I was interested in how it evolved because, again, he was in the situation where most native writing systems are based on the Latin alphabet. And I must acknowledge Richard Chung, who is a Facebook friend of mine, who speaks multiple languages. And he said a very interesting thing. He said, nobody knows how hard it is to maintain any other language in the American ocean of English. And so it makes perfect sense that the more you're surrounded by English and the Latin alphabet, the harder it is to think in terms of anything else. And the harder it is to introduce anything to oppose that. So when Mowgli began looking at reviving his language, he started out looking at using the Latin alphabet, or as he calls it, the English alphabet. And he says, the fact is, it doesn't really work. It doesn't work. There are sounds in Osage that you just can't get using the letters of what he calls the English alphabet. So then he looked at a number of other writing systems, and he faced another interesting problem, which is that the more precise the script, the more characters you need. So he thought he might create a syllabary, which is after all what Sequoia did with Cherokee, because that will accurately represent all of the sounds of the language. But he said Osage has 180 to 200 different syllable sounds. It's a very syllabic language, like many Native American languages, a lot of consonant, vowel. So you would think that would mean that it would work well as a syllabary, but there's just a lot of different syllables. So eventually he came up with a really interesting, I don't know if you'd call it a compromise or a bringing together of opposites. He decided that what he needed to do to sort of deal with all these problems was to create an orthography or a script which looked enough like English letters, as he put it, so that it wouldn't be too much of a change or a visual challenge, but enough not like English letters that it would be clear that they stood as symbols for other sounds. One of the problems with Cherokee, of course, is that some of the letters look exactly like Latin alphabet letters, but that's not how they're pronounced. So it introduces this curious kind of bifurcation of brain in the learner. He also faced a lot of opposition from people who are saying, why bother? You know, I mean, the Latin alphabet, it sort of works. We can sort of figure out what you mean, even though, so that the letter combination TH, which we have in English, has two different sounds, which were represented, interestingly enough, in Old English by two different symbols. But in Osage, there are actually three. So there's problems there. And eventually one of his colleagues said to him, and I want to get this quote because it's such a great quote. He said to him, Mowgli, you're never going to convince people to do this, but what you are going to get is their children. And sure enough, the opposition was mostly from people who were sort of set in their linguistic ways. And younger people and kids not only found it easier to learn, but were sort of more excited about it as well. And so he says there are now between 11 and 1,300 people taking online Osage language courses which use the script. To me, that's it's just a sort of a wonderful, wonderful story. And he himself, oh yes, here we go. So this is the wall of the language center, language education center out in Oklahoma, the Osage Language Center. I think that is like the world's greatest mural / graffiti, whatever. After this Zoom talk and our discussion is done, I'm actually going to introduce video. I was hoping that Kefa Ombewa would be able to join us. He is the co-creator of the Luo Lakeside Script. There it is, in Kenya. In fact, that's a carving I have just finished. It says for my Thank You All series, it says thank you all in Luo in the Luo Lakeside Script. And so what we're going to do is he sent me, he sort of did a selfie video talking about the script. We're going to edit that together. And then when we send out the link for the recorded version of this talk, you can also see Kefa Ombewa talking about Luo and the process that they went through. And you will also see that he and Mowgli said something that they both said was the most important thing in getting a script adopted, which is you have to get authority. It has to be somebody in charge who says, this is what we're going to do. Because otherwise it's possible, but it's really, really difficult. And I'm going to show you one last slide, which shows what happens when you don't have somebody in authority. So this literally came in overnight. This is how breaking news everything is. So this is a school in Jharkhand in India where they are now teaching an invented alphabet called Tolong Siki for the Kurukh language. And right in the middle there, you'll see Kurukh and Hindi. So we don't see an example of the script, which is called Tolong Siki, but we see signs that it's happening. And if you don't have an authority saying, yes, we're going to print textbooks and we're going to put this up on signage, etc., then this is how you have to do it. You have to do it literally one person by one person. And there are scripts in the world that are being taught. That's a hard road to hoe, and I wish them all the very best. So we're going to go over to the Q&A right now, but before we do, I want to say something, which is that I really want to make a pitch to ask you to support the Endangered Alphabet, and in particular support this series of Zooms. if everybody watching this presentation donated $5, that would actually cover the production costs of the next 2 Zooms. So we're not talking about a lot of money, but we really need that support. At the end, Alec is going to show you the URL for our website, although it's pretty straightforward. It's endangeredalphabets.com. And there's a tab there that says how to support us. And we would be extremely grateful if you would consider doing so. Okay, I know we have tons of questions. We've got the longest chat we've ever had. We've got this ferment of stuff going on in the background, so much so that I kept getting distracted because I saw these great comments and things coming up in the chat. But you can also use the Zoom hand up thing, and Alec will cut over to you and you can ask your question live and in person with your face on the screen if you like that kind of thing. Okay, Q&A, let's go, discussion, go ahead. Okay, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Personal one, what's your favorite script that you've worked on?
To carve, or because of its story, or what?
To carve and because of a story. I'm actually more interested in the story at this stage.
Gosh, because I love this whole kind of indigenously created thing, then the Dite Matsardinoko script, the extraordinary one based on the Ndebele art, I love that one. For its flowing qualities, I love Balinese, which therefore is also just beautiful to carve. But I have to say, I have not yet met a script that I don't like, except our own, which is 1, really dull, and 2, really stupid. I mean, it as somebody pointed out in the chat, it doesn't even work well for English. And it really doesn't work well for Dutch or for Polish or, you know, for a bunch of other languages as well. Okay, I've revealed my prejudices. Who's next?
There's one in chat there.
Okay, so yes. Okay. Oh gosh, there's all of this stuff in chat. I don't even know where to start. I'm starting at the wrong end. Okay, so what about the possible fate of invented scripts that don't have an empowering authority? Yes. Yeah, as I've said, there are a number of scripts that are literally being taught by one person and have been taught by one person, typically the inventor, for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And gosh, bless them for their persistence. There's one person in particular I was in touch with, and I tried to do a fundraiser for him, and I said, you know, what do you need? And he said, a blackboard. So we're talking about people of extraordinary persistence, but also in many cases, the scripts did not reach either a critical mass or they sort of fell away after a time. And so if you go to the Atlas of Endangered Alphabets online and you click the Help Wanted tab, then you'll see a whole bunch of scripts there, most of which are invented scripts that we cannot find out whether anybody is actually using anymore because the language community or the user community is so small. Okay. What's next? Oh, there's Balinese. Yeah, love it. Okay. I'm getting lost in chat here. Okay. Olish pointed out that, of course, the Nushu script was in where we can identify a specific inventor. And we don't know either who adapted, developed Nushu, or even when. But yes, Prasanna Shri is really doing this extraordinary thing of spending her life creating scripts for other people. Okay. Oh yes, Sebastian pointed out that the colors in the DTMR script also have meaning. So it's a script where you can add mood and emotional tone by adding color to those fascinating geometrical shapes that appear in these clusters, which I think is phenomenal. I would love it. I mean, obviously, we're starting to do that by having 10,000 fonts on our laptop and then printing stuff in color. But this is a script that was specifically created to be able to do that. Other questions? Oh, 3 new messages. What categories does a script need to fulfill to be recognized as a script for that language with potential for Unicode digitization? And that is a question from Rohan. Okay, so there's 2 different questions. Whether a script gets recognized as a script that represents a language is actually more about authority than anything else. If it is, so for example, one of the things that Mowgli said was that early on, the Osage Nation's government said, yes, we want to do this. And that meant that it's sort of a fait accompli, but it also means that now you've got to make it work, because every created writing system is sort of a work in progress. You're finding out more. It's like creating a game. When you actually play it, you discover all the things that work and all the things that don't work. So yes, it needs to be learnable. It needs to have, be phonemically sound, all this kind of thing. But probably most importantly of all, there has to be some kind of authority that is backing it, that would, for example, pay for the process of digitizing it, etc. I think we've been Zoom bombed. This has never happened to one of these before. Alec, can you take that down? Thank you. And then in terms of getting it into Unicode, there is a very long and very arduous process of examining the script and making sure that it's consistent and it actually does fit all of the linguistic needs of the language before then it gets proposed for inclusion in the Unicode standard. All that is like more technical than I understand, because I'm actually not a linguist in the slightest. Okay, more questions here.
I have a
here is a link you can visit without the Zoom bombing. Thank you very much. Must have been one of my middle. Yes. What is the date of scripts like Mandombe, which are currently difficult to include in the Unicode consortium because of their unique conventions? Mandombe or Mandombe, I believe, was created in the late 1970s. There are a number of scripts that are certainly less than 50 years old that are not yet encoded in Unicode. Sometimes what happens is that you get 2 different, I think factions is too negative a word, but 2 different groups who are using the script slightly differently. And so in order to get something encoded in Unicode, there needs to be a sort of an agreement on what all the characters are, what they stand for, what sounds they are, etc. And that is sometimes hard to come by. And so, yes, there are many scripts. I don't know the exact number. I've never thought of looking this up, but I would imagine that there are at least 30 scripts that are in some degree of usage that have not yet been encoded in Unicode. Okay, if you have questions or comments, by all means go to the endangeredalphabets.com website. You can send, in addition to donations, you can also send in questions and comments through the contact tab that we can, I'd be happy to respond to. So I'm going to say thank you all for registering and for joining in, all except the pirate, who is obviously intent on sabotaging what's going on here. Next time, the subject is beyond the alphabet. And I'll be sending out stuff over social media and emails to all of you saying what that means. So I wish you all well. Thanks so much for joining. I'm going to stay on and keep recording just so that we can use this as an introduction to the video from Kefa Ambewa, so that we can tag that onto the end of this and make all of that available as a package to anybody who goes to the link, which I will send you. So thanks so much. I'm exhausted. And for those of you who have some day left, enjoy the rest of your day. So I never thought that I would actually get to communicate with, talk to anybody who used an endangered alphabet, let alone somebody who had invented one. And so I've been just delighted to be able to be in touch with Mowgli Lookout of the Osage Nation, but also with Kefa Ambewa, who is the co-creator of the Luo Lakeside script from Kenya. We were hoping that he would be able to join us live. Unfortunately, his schedule didn't allow it. And so down and he recorded us a short video in which he explains the decisions and the challenges in creating a writing system, and in particular, the one that he created, and what it took to get it completed and accepted and then used so that it would find its user community. So here is the short video he sent us. I am constantly astounded and delighted to be in touch with people who are so committed to their language, their script, their culture, and the success and viability, especially of minority cultures around the world.
Hi there, team. This is Kefa Ambewa, and I'm very sorry it's not possible that I'm going to be available during the presentation concerning inventions of new scripts. However, I'm going to handle the items that you talked about. The first thing is who needs to invent a script. Basically, these are people who are interested in keeping proper representation of the phonemes that exist in their language and do not exist in other languages. For example, there are so many phonemes in European languages that don't exist in African languages. However, by the use of the Latin script, they've just barely covered the actual phoneme. So this is so important because that is the correct representation of the phonemes that exist in that language. For example, if you combine N, G with an apostrophe, it becomes ng. So instead of combining those two, you can just make one letter to represent ng as a phoneme. Also, ch is normally represented as C and H. Instead of combining C and H, you just have one. And for that very reason, there is spelling as an important issue amongst European languages. You have to spell words correctly. The next reason why people invent scripts is so that there is a proper separation in representation of culture. Cultures are not monolithic. So we cannot say, for example, the whole of China, for example, since they're only using one script, if someone 1,000 years later from today, cultures are not monolithic. So we cannot say, for example, the whole of China, for example, since they're only using one script, if someone 1,000 years later from today goes to the Chinese archives, they'll find only Chinese written. However, it does not mean that China as a country is just a monolithic country in terms of culture. So we have to put that in mind as well. The Southern Chinese speak a different language. They're totally different from the Northern Chinese and also the Western Chinese. However, all of them use the same script. However, if they could try and differentiate those scripts because of the different cultures, it would actually make sense. The other reason is uniqueness. It's very important to have uniqueness in writing as a medium of cultural exchange. This can be exemplified in the differences in the Arabic script depending on the location of whoever is writing in Arabia, for example. So then the next question is, what would make a script flourish? We can say the first reason is political support, very important. It's the leaders who are on the ground, they're the ones who make decisions. If you do not liaise with them, there's very little that the general public will do different from what their leaders say. So that is very important. Political leadership is important. Resources have to be allocated for a script to flourish. However, resources are also allocated by the same politicians. So that's why I keep saying it's the politicians who are on the ground, it's them to decide. So on our part, the only thing we can do is to convince the general public will do different from what their leaders say. So that is very important. Political leadership is important. Resources have to be allocated for a script to flourish. However, resources are also allocated by the same politicians. So that's why I keep saying it's the politicians who are on the ground, it's them to decide. So on our part, the only thing we can do is to convince those who are in power and make those decisions to take up the script, or if they want any modifications done, then they still liaise with us for their success. Other than that, I hope the meeting today is going to be successful, and have a good day. Thank you.